Okay, it's 9 o'clock here. Can I start now? My wife told me last time I started 2 minutes early and not everybody was there. So I decided I would wait for
We are
two
ready.
minutes. We're going to start in chapter 3. And as we left last time, I told you that chapter 3 is really attached to chapter 2, that there is no, if you go back and look at chapter 2, on the Hebrew side, you will find out that chapter 2 is a one prophetic message that goes through chapter 3 and all the way to verse number 2 in the fourth chapter, because there is no chapter and verse in Hebrew, only in Christianity. So they've established it. And so anyway, I haven't finished writing the notes, but I have studied my chapter 4. If we get time, I'll start into that. But anyway, I want you to go to chapter 3, and we're going to pick up where we left off last time because it was about idolatry. And we begin with a good question. This is a question that causes Christianity to believe that they have taken the place of the Jews. Judaism is going to move down, and Christianity is taking their place because of what they've done. So if you look at chapter 3, verse 1, it begins by saying, if a man divorces his wife and she goes from him and marries another man, can he return to her? That's the question. Can he return to her? Would that not bring profound guilt upon the land? Yet you have committed adultery with many lovers and would now return to me, says the word of Hashem. Okay, so the question is, did God divorce Israel? What do you think? Yes. Yes, he did. Question: does Israel and Judah create two different places? And the answer is yes. He separates himself from Judah, but he does not divorce them. So, what will happen to Israel in the end? Book of Ezekiel. Remember what happens in the book of Ezekiel? Chapter 37. Go look at chapter 37, verse 15.
Wait, Steve, what chapter?
Chapter 37. Do you see where we're at now? Okay. So it says, the word of Hashem came to me saying, now you, son of man, take for yourself one piece of wood and write upon it for Judah and the children of Israel, his comrades. You see that? Now we're going to write on a piece of wood. What are they going to write? You're going to write about the unification of Israel with Judah. God may have divorced Israel, but he did not divorce Judah. Judah returns, or Israel returns to God through Judah. You understand what I'm trying to say? I'm also trying to say that this is a metaphor, meaning that it is symbolic. It is not factual. So in both sense, we're both right. He did not really, truly separate himself from Israel. But at the same point in time, I want you to turn to Deuteronomy, if you will. I want you to go to chapter 24, which was actually this week's Parsha, Kasitzi. And I want you to go to the first 4 verses. We're on page 483 if you haven't found it yet. Okay, so we're back to chapter 24. Now, this is where the concept of divorce in Israel comes from. Now, if a man marries a woman and lives with her, and it will be that she will not find favor in his eyes for he found in her a matter of immorality, and he wrote for her. Well, we normally think of it as a get, but in this particular case, if you want to actually know what it means, you go to Sefer Kritut, which is on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines up from the bottom. First two words on the right. Samek Fe Resh, Sefer. Then you got a Kaf, Resh, Yud, Tav, Tav. So it's Kritut. Kritut. So if you write a bill of divorce for her and present it into her hand and set her from his house, she left his house and went and married another man. And the latter man hated her and wrote a bill of divorce and presented it to her hand and sent her from his house, or that latter man who had married to her himself will die. Her first husband, who divorced her, will not again take her to become his wife after she had been defiled, for it is an abomination before Hashem. So you shall not bring sin upon the land of Hashem, your God gives you as an inheritance. Okay, this text is the most important text for lots of different reasons. This is the first description and the only description you're going to get of divorce in the scriptures. That does not mean it's the only place it's ever talked about. It just means this is the place where it happens to be located in the scriptures. Now you'll go to the Talmud, and if you go to the Talmud, there's a book called Gittin, Gittin. Gittin is speaking of a get. The entire book deals with divorce. The entire book. It's one of those things that I've used on a couple of occasions to talk to, I talked with my sister-in-law because their daughter was thinking of remarrying. Is it possible? Can she? Because they know the verses in Deuteronomy. Is it okay? At that point in time, the minister in the church that she was going to said he would not marry her because she was divorced. So we had I think I sent her a 3 or 4 page letter trying to explain to her my understanding of this based upon Gittin. Now I want to take time to cover this, and it wasn't until this morning that I decided I was going to do this. So I started writing myself some notes. So please, I'm going to spend time looking down at my notes just to remind myself and make sure I go through all of the process. But Gittin is also the chapter that they use to discuss Tikkun Olam, the rectification of the world. Okay? This is a significant section. This is going to deal with how we should, is the ACLU correct in its dealings? Because you see, the ACLU came out of Judaism, came out of the Reform movement. So I want to spend some time and try to clarify some of the things I've been thinking, and at the same time share them with you. So I hope you have a good time. Now, Tikkun Olam simply means for the betterment of the world. So when we talk about divorce, we have to be thinking in terms of, does it better the world that we do that? And most of the time we would say, no, it's not better because of how it affects the family and the children. But there are cases when it is acceptable and when it's necessary. And that's the important thing that we got to understand. Now, in the first century, when they began, because this was written, 1,500 years before the first century, 24 was. So they began to, in the first century, try to explain what this section means. And so they began by talking about the fact that this betterment of the world, this idea of divorce, a husband and wife, if there is such a thing as a divorce, on the papers that they pass out, one of the things that has to be written on there is all the names that the couple go by. So, in other words, if you have a nickname, that is included in the divorce because sometimes you're going to move from place to place. And so what you're going to want to make sure is that everybody understands that these are the two people who divorced. So you have a list with both sets of names on it, the husband's names, the wife's names, any nicknames, any possible understandings of other names that go with it. Like, for example, Bobby. Well, Bobby is his name that we go by. Some people would call him Robert. Some would call him Bob. All three of those names would have to be on the get in order for the get to be legal. You understand? In other words, he may try to remarry his wife using the name that's not on that list. Well, that's cheating. Once you've divorced, you're divorced. Now, you can remarry if there's no one in between. But if there is a situation of a relationship outside of that, in other words, Bobby remarries, so he may not marry the first woman that he was married to. That's the way the system works. And so they understood from that. But the idea of tikkun olam, the idea for the betterment of the world, didn't only deal with just divorce. It went and covered other things. Like, for example, it wasn't until the age of Shammai and Gamaliel and all of those, the first century Jews, that they began to notice that the economy of the country was falling apart. Well, as the Jews were using Shemitah, and you understand Shemitah and the sabbatical year. In other words, on the sabbatical year or the Shemitah year, all debts are forgiven, right? Well, who borrows from another is usually the poor borrowing from the rich. Now, the question then becomes, I, as a rich person, am I willing to settle for less? If I've loaned him money at the beginning of that year, should I expect him not to pay for all of it back to me? Well, the answer is yeah, but the only problem is what if he stalls out for the year? Does that mean he doesn't have to pay you back? Well, the economy began to break down because people were stalling out that year. And if you happen to be a sabbatical Shemitah year, you've got 2 years in a row where basically everything is falling apart. So they wrote into the get, or into this section of Gatin, they wrote into this section that it would be unfair not to repay your debt. So therefore, at the end of the year, your debt was not eliminated. You continued to pay until you had paid it completely off. So that's the idea of tikkun olam. It's about the betterment of the world. What makes the world a better place if? And so that's what they kept going through. So it was Rabbi Hillel who actually came up with this whole idea. Now, this whole idea is based upon a Greek word, and the word is Prozbul, prosbul. And this is the idea of it's the idea of pro being for both, and butul, which means for the rich and the poor. So this is a rule for both the rich and the poor. That's the way it was actually written. So tikkun olam is about adjusting Jewish law when necessary to fit the framework of halakha, to fit the framework of the laws. That's what's supposed to happen. So with time, tikkun olam is going to take on different meanings. There was one meaning that began to grow out of this in the 2nd century with Shimon Bar Yochai and the writing of the Zohar. it was better explained during the days of the Arizal, which is about the 14th century. He really went into this whole idea. In fact, this is where I got many of my ideas that I sent to my sister-in-law. But anyway, it begins by going, it says God initially created a perfect world. And remember, in that perfect world, that the Sephiroth, I didn't talk to her about the Sephiroth, but the Sephiroth basically contained light, and there was so much light that was within these bulbs that the ones on the lower end began to shatter. And so the shattering of the vessels caused goodness to fall into uncleanness into the world. So the concept was that Adam and Eve, remember, they were supposed to tend the garden. Well, tending the garden meant to begin to bring back those shards, those shattered pieces, and reattach them, make everything work for the good. So this idea was going to work, except that Adam and Eve basically ate for the forbidden fruit. So again, everything fell apart, back to the way it started. So then from that point on, we talk about the process of tikkun, the idea of rectification. Now, when we rectify something, we correct and repair it. That's what's going on. In this repair is done by doing mitzvot. That is how we repair the world. The more mitzvot that are done, the greater the repair. That's the process. So as we're looking at what's going on, then God gave us the tools to rectify the world, and we have to understand we are a part of this rectification process. Now, rectification can come from us by two basic ways. One is by doing good things. That includes charity. The second way is through prayer. By prayer, we tend to rectify things that are wrong. When we pray for one another's illnesses, we're praying for the rectification of the world. Now, it's more than just the person we're praying for. It's all that we're praying for. And so I want to make sure that we understand this whole idea of what's going on. Now, the Arizal basically broke it down and said there are four parts to this process, or four aspects in it. The first one happens to be the rectification of ourselves. When we pray for others, when we do what is right, we are rectifying ourselves. In other words, we know what is right and wrong. And the more right we do, the more it becomes a part of us. But the same thing can be held if we do wrong. In other words, in the beginning, our soul lets us know that what we did probably was not right. But if I do it a second time, our soul has less to say about it until finally the soul no longer finds it as anything but a mitzvah. We're doing what we think is God's will for our lives. And so that's called the rectification of ourself. Now, the second thing that's going to happen in this particular process is the fact that it's about healing the lower world. And by this, I'm talking about freeing up the sparks. For example, when you and I eat, I don't know how many of you do it, but there's a prayer for Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam hamotzi lahem min ha'aretz. That's the blessing of the bread. Anytime we eat bread, anytime we drink wine, we're supposed to repeat those blessings, because it's in the Hebrew words that rectification occurs, because we are following God's plan or God's command. So it's important to pray, and when possible, to pray in Hebrew. That's the best way to do it. But that's only if you can. You do not have to. We're Gentiles. But it is an extra added when you do it that way. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about is tikkun for the higher world. We can rectify the higher world. How do we do it? When someone dies, And we are at the funeral or after. Remember, up to a year, that person's body can be in Gehenna or in a place other than heaven. Our responsibility, and especially that of a spouse, is to pray for that soul. In fact, every Friday in the Jewish culture, every Friday for the lost soul or the one who has been taken, the Jews will light a candle, and that candle will be there with the two candles that they would light normally on a Friday. And so there's a continual prayer for that person. So in essence, you're rectifying the world of the heavenlies. That's what's going on. So you rectify this world, and you can rectify the world in the heavens, because remember, God separated the two, the waters above from the waters below. In the end, they will both be part of one. So you're putting them back together again. That's what you do when you pray. The last thing that I want to say is the tikkun, the rectification of God's name. Remember, God is one. But according to Zechariah, 14, we know that when God will finally reign on this world, that'll be the first time that God will be one and his name will be one. So that's another purpose in this whole process. Finally, I guess the real tikkun is truly rooted in Torah law. And I say that because I started talking about the ACLU. There were two men that were responsible for what we would call the Reformation movement in the Judaism. One's name was Samuel Gompers, and the second's name was Louis Brandeis. Now, Louis Brandeis has a university where he's no longer alive. The university is pumping out ACLU people. It's a very Jewish school. It's in New Jersey, I think. And this school is so full of Reformed Jews. Now, the Reformed Jewish movement basically took and sidestepped halakha, the law, and they began to try to rectify anything that looked like it was not the way it should be. For example, Torah is about service and kindness. Well, today, the ACLU, their philosophy includes anything that is completely at odds with Torah and his word and God, which openly and proudly transgresses the law. For example, while we should certainly reach out to all Jews, regardless, and actually for everyone, regardless of their background, identification, orientation, to inspire them to come closer to God and be more Torah observant, there is no tikkun in waving the rainbow flag. This comes from the Orthodox. Another one, when we go against Torah, gender roles. This has become a real problem in the world, in the United States today, hasn't it? What is a woman? The role of each has become very much blurred in the minds. In fact, now transgender is better than being gendered. And people are being born into this world who need to be corrected. And so it's the idea of Brandeis is where this whole started and began to spread across. If I go back to Europe and I go back to pre-World War II, there was a war in words in Germany between the socialist and the communist. Now, this war was dragging on. In fact, it was becoming quite ardent between the two groups. It was solved by Adolf Hitler. He simply imposed his laws and eliminated the question between socialism and communism. But by doing so, he also chose to eliminate the communists. Where did the communists go? They didn't go to Russia. They came to the United States. They established themselves in the universities because these were scholars. These were men of renown, supposedly. And so the university began to accept them into it. In accepting them in, we began to see education change. And it began to move slowly. But now it's reached the point where the majority of the universities now deal in progressivism based upon the Brandeis model. That's what's going on. If you watch this week's news, you know that who's the richest man in the world? Tesla. You know who I'm thinking of?
Elon
Yes,
Musk.
Musk. His daughter, he now claims his daughter is communist because the universities have convinced her that rich people are bad. And therefore she's separating herself from the family. Well, this is where things are going. So I was talking to another fellow on Wednesday morning who had tuned in for the first time, Dave, in a while. And we were talking and I says, well, your son's about ready to go off to college. And he says, I'm not sure we're sending him. And I said, well, what's going on? He says, where can I send my son in Texas, of all places, and not worry about him being brainwashed? So he's talking about the fact that they probably won't go to college. But that's kind of a sad point, isn't it? We are so busy trying to find a place where we can fit in, where we don't have to give up our value system. So the idea is that tikkun olam, just like divorce, there's a subtle language here. And that language is based upon God. And so the idea, tikkun olam, is not about the embracing, or that's not about the divorce. Tikkun olam is about the rectification. That's what it's supposed to be about. So anyway, in the final days, you and I both know that that's what's going to happen. It will be rectified, but it's going to be massive. And we know we're getting close to those days because the things that are becoming more and more obvious is the decline of the United States. How have we changed since Trump left office? Now, remember, Trump spent a lot of time talking about the fact that this won't become a socialist nation. What's the first thing that happened after he was gone? All the rules that he had put in effect were almost immediately eliminated, putting us back on that path that's going that way. So this is the story. But, well, let me stop there. Anybody have any questions about tikkun olam? Am I giving you anything? Go ahead, Mary.
Couple questions. You said we light a candle and pray for them for a year, but don't some of them pray for them longer than that? Loved ones?
You can. I mean, you can light the candle in Hanukkah. You light the candle every Friday for the first year. After that, you light the candle on the day of their passing every year.
Oh,
Do you understand what I'm saying?
uh-huh.
That's all you have to do in order to keep Hanukkah. And understand, Hanukkah is a rabbinical order. It's not a mandated decree that's found in the Torah. So there have been additions to the Torah, the laws of Torah. In other words, you're given basics. We have 7 basic laws. If you look at the Jewish understanding, they have 613. But if you took those 613 and you began to put them under categories, you would find those categories are the 7 laws. So everything fits. So now you have the 7 laws, you have the 613, and under that, you would have what we would call the appendix, those laws that were added in order to assist in your walk with God. They're not necessarily something you have to do, but there's a good thing to be doing those kinds of things. So does that make sense to you?
Yeah. The second thing was, excuse me, I was reading this week in some Zohar commentary that, and maybe this isn't quite the right spot to put this in, but it said that God, because God never gave them a get, he did not divorce Israel.
Correct. He wrote the get because that's what we read here, right? He
Now,
wrote it, but he did not give it to them.
where does it say that he wrote them a get?
Going back to the first chapter, the third chapter, in
Yeah.
verse 1, it says, saying, if a man divorces his wife, she goes and marries another, then he continues, would that not bring profound guilt upon the land? So he wrote the get. You almost have to go, let's see. Yeah, because he changes his language at verse 4. If only from now on you would call me father. In other words, to be called his wife would be wrong because we've committed adultery. They committed adultery. That's idolatry. So what they did was, or what they should have done was no longer call him their husband, but to call him their father, because fathers don't divorce their kids. You understand what I'm saying?
That I read too.
So they changed from a wife relationship to a child's relationship. Now, this this whole area, I'm reading to you in Hebrew. Take those same 4 verses and go find a King James version and read it. You will find out that there was an actual divorce. That's a supposition of the language. You understand what I'm trying to say?
No.
There are
No.
many places in the King James version. Again, it's a translation. Anytime you translate from one language to another, you put in your own bias.
You weaken it.
You weaken what it actually
So
says.
how
So
does reading the King James convince me that he gave them a get?
I'm sorry, try it again. I couldn't quite hear you.
From what I'm hearing you're saying that in the King James it says that he divorced them. Well,
Correct.
since when do I take the King James over what I read in the Hebrew?
Well, you really don't. But the problem is when your daughter argues with you about Judaism, she brings Christianity up, doesn't she? In other words, you aren't following God. You're following the Jewish God, not my God. Well, the question is her God and your God the same God? And the answer really probably isn't no, because of the fact that her God, the laws are a little bit different. Every time I talk to my son and he wants to bring up JC, he always uses the word it's foreshadowed in the Old Testament. Didn't we learn that in when we were in the Christian church?
Oh, yeah.
Everything was a foreshadowing of God, of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
I asked the simple question, why does it only foreshadow? Why doesn't he use Jesus' name in the Old Testament? What a difference that would make.
Mm-hmm.
But he doesn't use that. They can only point to a foreshadowing. And that's because why? They understand that he's the Messiah will come. And they understand that Jesus is the Messiah. That goes back to the book of John. Who are you? You understand? That's where they get their ideas from. Well, he didn't say he was. You got to go back to the Old Testament and find the foreshadowing. In every chapter. I was talking again last time we went out to lunch. Did you know that the 12 books of prophets, the 12 minor prophets, all speak of a facet of Jesus? You just have to go figure it out. I never heard that before. I guess that's the newest teaching, but it still goes back to a foreshadowing. It doesn't say Jesus said, or Jesus is this person. And so when you see him in the New Testament, you'll know who he is. It doesn't say that. So we assume, we make a leap to make it work. You and I no longer leap. We just look at the text. What does it say? How does it fit? We know the word Messiah is actually in the Greek word anointed. Christos is the Latin word. 3 words, same idea. When the Christian sees the word Messiah, he places Messiah, Christos, the same. They're the same one. But we know that the word Messiah is used 38 times in the Old Testament. 33 of those times he's talking about the Kohanim. The other 5, we know in Isaiah 45:1, he uses the word Cyrus the Anointed or Cyrus the Messiah. So Cyrus was Jesus Christ. Now, if you find another place where you can put Cyrus into the New Testament, you might have a winner, but you can't. You got this problem. So you got to go over and over again in your own mind. It's hard for them to understand what you're teaching or what you're saying because there's so many people telling them they're right. And so you quit telling them. You just nod your head. But anyway, that's the way it works. Did I answer that question or I just go rambling?
Well, you answered it, but I still don't, I still don't agree. We'll just agree to disagree at this point.
Well, wait a second. You and I cannot disagree. We have to be in total agreement.
Yeah.
No, we don't. It's our system that we have to believe we're on God's path.
You know, I
However,
I learn more when I agree to disagree because we can both be right.
and you also, by doing so, solidify in your own mind your own understanding of who God is. That is the most important thing. Who is God? Is God Jesus? Is God the Holy Spirit? Or is God God? That's the question. There's only one.
He's not a transformer. He doesn't come apart and
No.
you go into a.
Laura, you got an idea that you want to express. Go for it.
Well, I'm still wrestling. I read your notes and I'm still wrestling with this thing of Judah copied the idol worship, of the group that was up north doing it. They copied.
Mm-hmm.
And the note said God gave a bill of divorce to the northern tribes, but not to Judah. And I went, really? They held to the line of King David. Farther down, it says Judah didn't return to me with all their heart. So I don't see how they escaped having the divorce. It seems like they all got it because they didn't repent. They didn't return. So I'm still wrestling with that.
And you will for quite a while until you come to well, never mind. I can't tell you what you should come to. That's got to be something you figured out. My understanding is that at this point in time, as you're looking into chapter 3, one of the things he asks them to do is now to think about the idea of father-son relationship. Obviously, it would not work out as a husband and wife. And we talk about faithful and unfaithful as we go through the rest of the chapter, right? As we're going to go through, we'll talk about that. You know, this whole section, last week was pretty depressing. I basically wallowed in how the United States is looking more and more like Israel. And this week, we're now going to go into understanding what is God's understanding of what's going on. How is he looking at it, and how is he looking at us at this particular point? Because you and I can also find ourselves in a situation of being not divorced, but we can find ourselves in a situation which we would call divorce. In other words, we've stepped away from God so far. We've followed the world into what's going on. We'll eventually get to the idea of Ishmael and Hagar, and that may make it a lot easier. Mary, you want to add, subtract, multiply?
Wouldn't that be more like a separation?
What he gave to Israel, or what he gave to Judah, you mean?
What he gave to Israel and Judah.
Well, Judah, it says he gave it to, well, the Hebrew says.
He's explaining a get here. As I'm looking at it, he's explaining a get, but I don't see anything that says he wrote them a get.
Look at verse number 8. And I saw that despite the fact that I divorced wayward Israel.
Okay. Because of her adultery. Oh, there it says I gave her a bill of divorcement. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, we were ahead of ourselves, but that's the point. He divorces Israel. Understand that. What will become the saving factor is the fact that he doesn't divorce Judah. You understand? Had he divorced all of them, then we would have a free-for-all. But Judah is exempt, not because they were so wonderful and so good. Although we know in Israel and in Judah both, there were those who had a righteous heart, right? We know in the days of Judah, when they go into exile, Daniel was a perfect person. He was innocent of all that. We know that Mordecai, we know that Ezekiel, the three boys, there were many that went into exile not because they earned it, and God would never divorce them, but as a group, and that's the key factor, as a group, that's what the divorce was about. Okay? Hopefully. Okay. Lori, where am I at with your question?
Yeah, I can totally understand that dads don't divorce kids. Moms don't divorce kids. So that part helps, but oh well. But I can also understand how people get confused about names and thinking so-and-so is this or that, because I've struggled with being so new. You guys are used to it. Abraham also was the spirit of so-and-so, and also the spirit. And of course, Laban had several names. All kinds of people have more than one name. And so, oh my goodness, if you don't read Hebrew, you're screwed. So I can see how people screw up and mess up what they assume the Bible says. It's easy.
And it's very easy. That's why in the world to come, what will become the universal language?
Hebrew.
Hebrew. In other words, we'll all be speaking one language, which is the way it was in the beginning. Now, even knowing that in the beginning, Adam and Eve spoke Lashon Kodesh, they spoke the Hebrew language. Even though Enosh, the third son, the grandson, spoke English or spoke Hebrew, did not keep them from establishing idolatry in that third generation. Every generation has to work very hard at making sure that they inform the next generation. Each generation. What's happening in the United States today is no different than what happened in all of the other cultures. The idea is there is less people establishing ground rules until the point that everybody is free to make their own opinion and make their own judgments and their own statements. Remember the book of Judges? Each man did what was right in his own eyes. The culture had completely broken down. Everybody was right. Can everybody be right? Not really, because we value, our value system is based on our emotional feelings. Like I said, the first time I commit a sin, my soul reminds me that I'm in foreign land. I understand it as a name showing an attribute. That is why perhaps there were different names. Yes, 72 names for God, different attributes, different parts of God. But when we think of the word God, first off, we're thinking in English. If I use the word Hashem, who am I talking about? The God of mercy, the God of grace. If I use the word Elohim,
Judgment.
I'm now saying he's judgment. If I use the word Shaddai, he is enough. If I use the word Adonai, he's the master. Each time I use just simply the word God, I kind of limit and restrict the way we perceive him, because our vocabulary doesn't allow for him to be having all these attributes. When he passed before Moses, remember on the mountain, and he couldn't see his front side, but only his backside, what did he see? He saw these 10 attributes. He saw the intellect, he saw the emotion, and he saw the behavior of what man should be. That's what he saw. But when we look at it, we just simply say God was a physical being and he passed right before Moses. Was God being physical when he passed before Moses at that point in time? No, not at all. That is something that we have added to the story, because we don't see God as being anthropomorphic. We don't see him as being something that is not visible, not easily seen. Does that make sense? It's a good question so far. Anybody else?